screen share. So hello again. Just be aware that microphones are muted, but you can unmute them anytime. It's just because if you make any comments of this music in the background or sound or dogs or anything. So my name is Mario Bernardi, and since March, basically, since the pandemics happened, of course we couldn't give any tours in person. The Vatican Museums itself have been closed for nearly 2 months, so I decided to start giving these tours, and this is one of the free tours that I give just to promote and advertise what basically we are doing at this moment. Now let's just start, and let me just share screen again. Basically I'll be using 3 different media. As you could see, I use a lot of pictures. I don't use a presentation, a PowerPoint. I don't really believe in PowerPoint. I like to create the talk as we go. So of course I know what I'm talking about, but I will pull up the pictures as needed. Don't worry, because even if there are many, I know what they are. But the main tools that we're about to use today will be this one, which is basically an official app of the Vatican Museums. You can find it on the official website of the Vatican Museum, which is Musei Vaticani in Italian, museivaticani.va, which is the extension of the Vatican Museum. I see more people are joining. Welcome. So basically, the application it's a 360 degrees virtual picture that actually we can navigate as if we were actually there, and it's quite unique because you can actually explore the entire chapel by yourself. You could actually do a couple of tricks as well that you cannot do in person, so it gives you a different perspective. It's actually it is not as being there in person, of course, but we got the chapel all to ourselves. Now, before I start, I'd like to introduce you to this man, which is probably, after Michelangelo and the popes who wanted to create the chapel, this is probably the most important man in the history of the chapel. His name is Gianluigi Colalucci, and he was the head of the team of restorers that were permanently employed by the Vatican City in the 1970s, 1980s. I think he retired towards the mid-1990s or late 90s, nearly 20 years ago. Colalucci was working on routine maintenance. So he managed to restore some of the sculptures and some of the paintings in the Vatican Museums. You know, the Vatican, if we go with using Google Earth here, we are in Rome. Yeah, let me just turn this thing around. I use Google Maps, but sometimes it is a little bit slow. So here, yes, this is Rome. Sometimes the internet I will be quite slow with this one because otherwise you might miss some bits. So if we zoom in like this, you could see that's the Vatican City State right in central Rome. It's actually a separate country from the rest of Italy, and has walls all around. Of course, the main building that really stands out is the Basilica of St. Peter's, which has been there for nearly 1700s. Of course, the old basilica was built in the late Roman times by Emperor Constantine, and then it was rebuilt in the Renaissance. And basically, at the time when the basilica was being rebuilt, when they started beginning to rebuild it, that's when Michelangelo got involved with the Pope and Pope Julius, and with the Sistine Chapel. Now, if we look at the Basilica of St. Peter, I'm sure it's a pretty familiar sight for most of you. Just on the right side, there is this from the outside, it's quite an unassuming church. It looks like a really small chapel. It doesn't look like much from the outside. If we put the 3D again, you could see from the outside, it kind of looks like a fortress. It's got this kind of windows and some walls actually looks a bit like the passageway used by the guards. It kind of looks like a fortress. I have a picture as well, so I can show you better probably with a picture. And it looks kind of like a kind of a military building, and it is not casual. It's the fact that the builders of the chapel, Giovannino de Dolci and Baccio Pontelli, this is the name of the two architects who built that in the 1400s, were actually mostly military architects. They built castles, fortresses, city walls, and that kind of stuff. So some of that kind of military style can be seen in the design of the chapel from the outside. Now, let me see, because I've got people joining. Yes. So what was the Sistine Chapel? Well, it was basically the chapel of the popes during the Middle Ages, called Cappella Magna. So we know there was another chapel before in this position, and then it was rebuilt starting from around 1478, 1480, in a very interesting times for Italy. At that time, the Pope was Sixtus IV of the La Rovere family. I'll show a portrait of him later on. And he was also involved with the Medici of Florence. He actually was part of a treason carried out by the Cardinal Francesco Riario, who was about, Raffaele Riario, which was who had as a scope to kill, to murder Lorenzo Magnifico, the Lord of Florence, the famous Lorenzo, and the actual patron of Michelangelo as well, and to establish a republic, or anyway, a kind of lordship which was closer to the church and not independent as the Medici was. So this is the kind of political situation at that time. Anyway, back to our man Colalucci. I know I might be a bit distracted, but I like to, start from the end and then go back to the beginning, so make it a little more interesting. So one day, Colalucci was doing just a routine cleaning. So it's here. He was basically working on these images here, just above the entrance door. Now, this door, it's the door that leads to the Vatican, to Palazzo Apostolico, basically where the Pope has his apartment and offices, and also where he receives the official visitors, delegation, ambassadors. So this door is not used by tourists, usually closed. This is the door that leads into the Basilica. On the opposite side, there's a little door on the right, we'll see later, where, millions of tourists used to enter till the beginning of this year, every year. This year is still open now, but of course the number of visitors has dropped dramatically, creating a hole of few tens of millions in the Vatican state accounts. So you can see that the Sistine Chapel is entirely frescoed, and I'll go through all the different moments of fresco. Basically, it was decorated in three phases. First one at the beginning of 1480s by Botticelli, Perugino, Ghirlandaio, the greatest masters of Florentine art in the 1400s. Then the ceiling with the creation created by Michelangelo in the beginning of 1500s, and then some 20 years later, Michelangelo completed it with the Last Judgment. So I'll go through all of them. First of all, I want to tell you how the biggest discovery about the Sistine Chapel in the last decades was made. So this man I just showed in picture, Colalucci, was actually cleaning these images of popes. These portraits were made in the 1400s. They represent the early popes of the Catholic Church. Above, they are these figures painted by Michelangelo together with the ceiling. So he also does these little arch parts here. They're called lunette, because they have a little moon. They have a little moon shape, and right in the center you could see the coat of arms of the Della Rovere family. It's an oak tree, because Rovere in Italian means oak tree, so they had that on their coat of arms, and of course the cross keys, symbol of the papacy. Now Colalucci was cleaning here. They were removing some damages and fixing some cracks in the wall, and then he had this idea. At that time, the Sistine Chapel looked very, very different than what it is today. It looked more or less like this. So it was dark. It was covered with a thick layer of fat, grease, dust, smoke. 500 years of dust and smoke and other dirt. So it looked dark. If you studied, if you open any handbook or research about Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel written before 1980, you will find Michelangelo is described as a very dark and gloomy artist who had this negative and dark vision that is basically a kind of he was kind of foreseeing all the dramatic wars in Europe, the religious wars, the religious persecution, the crisis between the Protestants and the Catholic Roman Church, and the crisis of the Roman Church. And of course, Michelangelo was quite critical of the church, of the corruption of the Catholic Church at that time, the reason for which Martin Luther and the other Protestants split up from the Church of Rome. But Colanucci had this kind of genius moment. Those moments that only happen like very rarely in history. He took a little napkin and with a bit of saliva, he starts scraping off some of this dirt from one of the figures. The figure was this one here, sitting just above the entrance. This one here, which is pretty dark. I have a detail of it. Is the image of Eleazar, one of the biblical ancestors of Jesus Christ. Which I have it here. So Eleazar is this one on the right, and this looked really, really dark. So he cleaned a little portion, and this white bright shirt came out. And he actually thought, what if we clean it all? And then he got permission to try to clean the entire figure. So he cleaned the old figure of this guy, and this beautiful blonde man popped out the dust and the dark of centuries, and he was really impressed. The director of the Vatican Museum was impressed. At that time, the Pope was Pope Wojtyla, John Paul II, now Saint John Paul, and he said, oh yes, go ahead. We raised money. People from all over the world, from Japan to the Americas, from Europe, from Asia, they donated millions and millions to clean the chapel. It took over 10 years to clean just the ceiling and another 7-8 years to clean the walls. And eventually, this was shown basically to the world again. The chapel in all its glory and splendor. These magnificent bright colors, a complete different Michelangelo. At that time wasn't an easy job because people criticized very much what happened to the chapel, the complete change. I can show you that the difference before and after, it's really something really really amazing. So we have it here. That's for example another dark one. The picture is not great, but you could feel that the difference was complete different. This must have been 1970s or so. So it's really, really something dark. Now, with the removal of that thick layer of dark, the smoke, they also removed some details of the frescoes. For example, some of the shading was made actually not with painting, but with the smoke of a candle. They're called sfumature. Fumo in Italian means smoke. So that kind of sfumato, that kind of effect is probably been lost. So that, especially in these figures here, you could see these details here. Maybe this one is better. Yeah, there were some details here. Some of the shading in the figures, they were a bit stronger before. You could see them a little bit more. Anyway, even if artists like even Andy Warhol and other, Andy Warhol was Catholic, and even other contemporary Italian artists really criticized the cleaning because it was too much for them. This is before and after. It always reminds me, this one of those ads about washing powder, before and after you wash your clothes. And in fact, it was a deep white washing. So you could see all bright and all the colors being bright. Some of the, for example, the face here on the left, you could see, you couldn't really see much. It looks like a ghost, while here there's more details. On the other side, if you look at details on the frames, this one's, the shading is completely lost because it wasn't painted. It was just done with the smoke of a candle. So that was lost, for example. But apart from that, I mean, the result is amazing. And a complete new Michelangelo was showed to the word. And also the beautiful Renaissance artwork on the sides kind of started to shine again. Now, the man who named the chapel of Sixtus, so Sistine Chapel, it's named after this Pope here sitting on the right. This fresco was made in the 1470s by 1475 by a painter called Melozzo da Forlì. And it was the scene with which the Pope created the Vatican Library, one of the oldest and most important libraries in the world, which is housed to over 1 million printed books and another 1 million of various objects, including basically rare books, manuscripts, documents of the history of the church. There's an amazing number of works. So the Pope already had a personal collection of books since probably the late 1400s, when Martinus V in the Vatican. But Pope Sixtus was the one who created the library. And this man on his knees, Bartolomeo Platina, was a scholar at that time. He became the very first librarian of the Vatican Library. Standing in the center and next to him, there are these two nephews, the Cardinal Riario, and then the other one standing there, the Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, who later on became Pope with the name of Julius II. Now, at that time, there was this habit that the first thing that the Pope did when he became Pope was to make at least 2 or 3 of his nephews cardinals. So to ensure that when he died, the family stayed within the power system of the church, of the Catholic Church. So the papacy was not just a passing, moment for the family, for the wealth of the family. Of course, being a pope at that time, yes, of course, was a spiritual call to be, the leader of the Catholic Church, but the church had also a state. And so the Pope was also head of state and a number of duties, territories, armies, and that was at war with other countries and so on. So he played a very important political role in Europe at that time, not just in Italy, in all Europe. So France, Spain, Austria, the German Empire, England, they were all involved, of course, with the Pope and the Catholic Church in a time where European forces used Italy as a battlefield, especially in the first years of the 1500s. It's a time between 1494 and 1559 when these are called the wars of Italy. That about over 60 years of wars where French armies, Spanish armies, Austrian armies, Italian armies, they all fight each other. The Turks even arrived. So it was really interesting period for Italian history. Anyway, back to the Sistine Chapel. The chapel was originally quite different from what it looks like now. First of all, had no figures on the ceiling. Now, this is just an etching to give you an idea how it was. The ceiling was all painted blue with bright stars, which was quite common in the 1300s, 1400s to have a ceiling like that. Some large churches like the Basilica of Assisi has some of that decoration. The chapel of the Scrovegni in Padua, painted by Giotto, has the same ceiling. So we can find many chapels in Italy with that ceiling. Now, the ceiling is of course was covered by Michelangelo and was probably even damaged before, but we have a couple of images that show us how the ceiling could have been. You can see this is one of the documents that shows how the chapel could have been. Now, if you look at that, the stars are in different size and different position. They would be probably meant kind of an astrological, they must have had an astronomical or astrological meaning, which we don't know. It hasn't been studied yet, but I'm pretty sure there would be maybe the position of the stars could have given us a clue to what was the date of birth of the Pope or the foundation of the Pope or something like that, because everything that was done in the past, it was also done in the way that everything had a meaning. There's always a symbology, the name of the church, the place where it's made, the reason why there's certain decoration. Everything has a reason. It's not just done because they like it that way. There's always like a justification, a symbology, something they wanted to mean. This one is not really known. Anyway, for the sides of the chapel has the histories of the life of Moses on the south wall. Here on the left, let me see. We get closer to the altar. This is the altar painted, the altar wall painted by Michelangelo, the last thing to be painted. So we talk about this last judgment. On the side, we have these frames with the episodes of the life of Moses on the left, which is the south wall, and on the north wall, we have the episode of the life of Christ, just facing each other. And then we have the christening of Christ, painted by Pietro Perugino, who was the master of Raphael, so one of the greatest artists of the 1400s. And on the other side, we have, again, Perugino making the painting the circumcision of the son of Moses and first episodes of the life of Moses. Before this were painted, 3 more scenes stood in the center that were later on destroyed and covered by Michelangelo. Now, I know it may sound horrific, like to destroy, you know, other masters' artwork, but it was pretty common in the Renaissance, in the 1600s, 1700s, basically to get rid of whatever stood in the way and just do it new. Like, you know, today we just remove the carpet or repaint the walls. For them, it wasn't a big deal. Something made 100, 150 years before, oh, this is old, let's cover it up. So they want a new fashion. This is an image that shows how the main altar would have looked like. So there was Moses rescued from the water and the adoration of the Magi King. The adoration of the shepherds, so the shepherd adorating the birth of Jesus. At the bottom stood the fresco or the altarpiece painted by Perugino as well, with the Assumption of Mary, because the Sistine Chapel, as every chapel or church in the world, is dedicated to a specific saint, in this case to Virgin Mary, in the occasion of her Assumption, which is when Virgin Mary, after she died, she ascended to the skies, to the heavens with her own body. And then at the bottom, you could see these tapestries. These were made later on by Raphael. He provided the drawing, and basically the tapestry were made in Brussels in the workshop of Peter van Elst. Now, years ago, I'm not sure if 4 or 5 years ago, in New York City, there was a big exhibition about Peter van Elst's workshop, about the tapestry. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it was really, really interesting. Now, so if we go back to the virtual part here, yes. The next one is very interesting. I also have some pictures with more detail for some of them. Of course, there are 6 per side. There were more. There were 16 because the 2 on the front here and the other 2 on the other side have been destroyed or repainted. So now there are only 12 in total left, 6 per side. Here we have Botticelli, Moses and the daughters of Jethro, Moses and the burning bush. So the first episode again of the life of Moses. Of this one, we take the picture because it's really fantastic. Now, before I just said that Pope Sixtus was part of a conspiracy of a attempt to kill Lorenzo Magnifico. His brother actually was killed, and this happened on the 26th of April 1478, when basically where is the picture? Where basically the Cardinal Riario, which was the Pope's nephew, went to celebrate the Mass in the Duomo of Florence, and during the Mass they tried to stab them to death. And Lorenzo was saved, but Giuliano, the brother, was killed in this group. So they started a war. An army marched towards Florence to kill them and finish it. But the army actually stood for basically a year, the whole winter, in the Chianti area. Now, you can't blame them because, with the wonderful countryside, good wines, of course, the army wasn't rushed to go down to Florence. But anyway, in the spring, when the war was about to take place, the Turks arrived and invaded southern Italy. So the Pope proclaimed a crusade against the Turks. And so, you know, the foreign enemy just distracted everybody, and so they made a peace. Actually, they made a deal. So Lorenzo Magnifico made a peace with the Pope, and the Pope also said, okay, we're not trying to kill you anymore, now we're friends. And after this peace treaty, Lorenzo, to show appreciation for the peace and for everything that was to come, sent his best artists and painters from Florence to Rome. Now, you all know that Florence was the crib of the Renaissance. The Medici and other wealthy family and bankers invested an incredible amount of money in these artists, in training them, in providing them everything they needed to do great art. So Florence is the birthplace of Botticelli, Donatello, Ghirlandaio, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and many, many others. Even artists which were not native or trained in Florence, like Raphael, Raphael spent at least 3 or 4 years in Florence training, and that's one of the steps that made him, you know, becoming Raphael, because Florence, you wanted to do great art in the world at the time, Florence was the place to be. There were philosophers, there were sculpture, there was the technology, the knowledge, the literature, everything you needed, and the best artists to become a genius. So Botticelli was one of the greatest artists of Florence at that time, if not the greatest in those years, in the 1480s. This is the same years when he painted for one of Lorenzo's cousins, another branch of the Medici family. He painted the spring, he painted the birth of Venus and all that kind of artwork. This one, I like it particularly because it's of the same quality and it's beautiful, and there's an abundance of gold and beautiful details. You could see that those are Jethro here, whom then Moses married. Here, you see, she looks a lot like the Venus in the birth of Venus. Actually looks a lot like, she's very similar to a woman that was very famous at that time and was the wife of one of the Vespucci's, same Vespucci family of Amerigo Vespucci, the one later on made the circumnavigation in the Americas, the one arrived soon after Columbus. So basically, this woman was called Simonetta Vespucci, was one of the models that inspired Botticelli. So you could see her face here. And then there is, of course, Moses here with burning bush, rays of lights everywhere. And then you could see here basically the oak tree again, which is referring to the family of the Pope, who actually was paying for all this. There are also some acorns made of wax. Now this picture is not the best. I have another one, but I can show you the acorns, which are basically let me see. They're actually three-dimensional, so they are made of wax and then gilded. So they're actually like a little lumps that you could see from the distance. So here we are. There you see, you have, this is the detail of the same oak tree. You could see the little acorns made of wax and then gilded. So they're actually three-dimensional. So they had these kind of special effects together with the gold embedded. Of course, very often when you read or when you take a tour about painted chapels with biblical histories, they tell you, oh, this was the Bible of the poor. Poor people could not read. And so by seeing the images, people could learn about the religious history. Well, it's the case for many, many churches, but not for this one. This was not open for poor people. This was the chapel of the most important palace of the Catholic world. So this was the Pope's chapel. This was the place where the Pope showed off to all the cardinals, the men of power, the nobility, the theologians. So people that joined him, the Pope here, it was all highly educated. So here we are on another level. Here he shows the wealth and the complexity of the Catholic theology. Then we have the crossing of the Red Sea with, of course, the Egyptians drowned in here. While on the other side, we have the Temptation of Christ on the left, again by Botticelli, with on the background a palace that still exists in Rome. I can show you. Because Botticelli, of course, he was native of Florence, was very, very impressed by the architectures that you could see in Rome, both ancient, of course, the Roman ones, but also the medieval one. Now, just by the river Tiber in Rome, there is this place which was the Collegium Saxorum, the Saxons' college. It was the place where the British of the Saxon pilgrims during the Middle Ages actually stayed, is this building here, which is still existing to this day. For a while it was a museum, was open, but now I'm not sure. They use, I think they use it for temporary exhibition, temporary shows. Is this one? So this, the facade here in this Google thing, the actual facade is in where is it? Which is the one basically on the back of the chapel here. Now, if we, and then next to it, sorry, this way, there is another very important one, which is the calling of the disciples Peter and Andrew. This was painted by Domenico Ghirlandaio, who was the master of Michelangelo. Michelangelo, between the age of 14 and 16, so he was really young, was sent to the workshop of Ghirlandaio to work in there as an apprentice. It didn't end up well. Michelangelo believed that the master was selling some of his sketches as his own because he was so much talented, even more than the master. So after a couple of years, he left that apprenticeship, and then he went in the academy funded by the Medici, where eventually he met Lorenzo Magnifico and was practically adopted. So he grew up in Lorenzo de' Medici's house. Now here, Ghirlandaio also put a little signature in the fresco. I have a better picture to show you. One of the guys in the background, which is here, has a garland in his hair. See, the characters painted, they're all contemporaries, all dressed like contemporary people. So there's actually quite a complex composition where you can recognize a lot of contemporaries. I'll show you a couple later on. The garland is called, it's basically cryptomania. It's basically kind of a cryptic signature in the fresco. Instead of signing with a name, they put something that is referred to their name, which could be either a letter or an object. In this case, Ghirlandaio means the garland maker, the guy who makes garlands. And so you have the garland in the head of this man. So that's what gives away the author. There's a couple more. And then there's also a little a pet dog that you can find. For example, this is when Moses came back from with the 12 commandments, and then the 10 commandments, and then he gets upset and throw it on the floor because of course the Jews were worshiping the gilded calf. And there's a little doggy here. The dog, actually, we saw it also. There is also in the Red Sea, in the crossing of the Red Sea, and also in the first one we saw before. Actually, in total, it's 5 different times this little white dog is painted. This was actually the pet dog of one of the painters, Cosimo Rosselli, who is the painter who painted actually this fresco here, another of the masters that worked there together. Imagine a team of artists. There was also Signorelli, but Bartolomeo della Gatta, other artists, all important artists of the 1400s. Rosselli, rosso means red in Italian. So Rosselli used a little cup with the brush and the red paint as its signature. So in this case, this left just on the edge of the fresco. This is all painted, of course. It's not three-dimensional. It's just painted. It's just flat. There is the red as a symbol of, and the paint and the brush as a symbol, like Rosselli painted. And then we get to the ones that are probably the most important. We have of course, the speech of the mountain and the healing of the leper. And then we have, again, Botticelli and Perugino, which Botticelli was probably the one in charge of coordinating everybody. Here we have the punishment of Datan, Abiron, and Coran. Now, let me pull up the picture because this is very interesting, because there's a very deep theological meaning to this one. This is a manifesto for the church. Remember, this was the place where the theologian, the politician, the men of the people in the army, all of these people gather during the official ceremonies with the Pope. This was the personal chapel of the Pope, the private chapel of the Pope. The difference between a church and a chapel is that a church is usually a standalone building open to the public, usually serves a community like a parish. while a chapel, it's a church that serves and belongs to another building, usually is inside another building or within a set of building. In the Palazzo Apostolico, there are several chapels. It's not just this one. Of course, there's several others, but this is the largest one within the Vatican. And of course, most palaces in Rome, they have a private chapel or two private chapels. And while, you know, in total in Rome, there are about 1,200 churches and chapels altogether. It's quite a lot of places of worship. Now, you can see this is when Moses was tried to be, there's an attempt to stone Moses here on the left, and then Dathan, Abiram, and Korah are punished by Moses and sent down to hell. In the background here, we have Aaron, Moses' brother. Now, they're actually represented here as twins. They have exactly the same profile, the same faces. The Pope wanted you to see that they are brothers, that they look alike. And Aaron, he is wearing the hat, the tiara, which is the symbol of the Pope. This hat was the hat that the Pope wore till 1960s. Now the Pope doesn't wear it anymore. They only wear like the bishop kind of one, the white tall one, when he is on the altar or during the official ceremonies when he walks to the altar. Usually he just use the little white zuccotto, we call it, like the little white thing. It looks like a kippah, if you know what I'm saying. And we call it zucchetto in Italian. It doesn't wear the big crown, you know, anymore, but they used to do it in 1960s, till the Vatican II. Now, there is also an inscription that explains what the Pope means here, and what, of course, the artist was asked to paint. This is a marble arch which symbolizes the, of course, the ancient heritage, the ancient culture, but and it's inspired after the Arch of Constantine the Great, because of course Botticelli was able to study these Roman monuments while he was in Rome. He spent in Rome a couple of years. Then his father died, so he got permission to go back to basically to go back to Florence to sort out his family. And then after that, he probably asked to Lorenzo to stay in Florence. He didn't like being in Rome, and he kind of got sort of the depression towards the end of the 1400s, and so he became a bit strange in his behavior. So he didn't come back to Rome anyway. So he did less paintings I should have originally done. Anyway, it says here on the background, Nemo, this is Latin, Nemo sibim assumat honorem nisi vocatus adeo tamquam Aaron. Now, for those of you that don't speak Latin fluently, it says, no one should assume this honor, which means the honor of becoming a leader of the church, a priest, if not called by God as was Aaron. So Aaron was called by God to be the spiritual leader of the Jews, to be the high priest of the temple, of the Jewish religion. And so the Pope is called by God. No man should interfere with that, because if you do, that's what happens. The hell's open under your feet and you go straight down to hell. This was a clear message. Now, of course, Lutheranism and Protestantism didn't happen till the beginning of the 1500s, so about some 30 years later. But the elements of, you know, protesting about the authority of the church, the theology, the number of elements that led to Protestantism were already there. There have been already other movements and movements that the Catholics call heretical movements before. So there's a very strong political message in this one. And on the opposite, we have the handing of the keys, which is again very important, because here is Christ giving the keys of the kingdom of heavens to St. Peter. Peter, his name was actually Simon, but then it was renamed Peter, which means stone. And you know, it says on the top in Latin, it says again, this is the traditio legis, the giving of the keys. And so this is what makes the church the Catholic Church. The message is, no one can be saved only by his faith. You need the priest, you need the keys to open the gates of the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't matter how good you are, but without the church, without the sacrament, you're not going to get through those gates. And it's a very clear message. You could see the keys, Jesus Christ, Peter on his knees, and all the disciples around. And now within the disciples, there's also a group of men here on the right. I have a better picture because there's two on the right, which are basically the builders of the chapel. which are here, Baccio Pontelli e Giovannino de' Dolci. One was the designer, and Giovannino de' Dolci probably built it. So the two ones are here. You could recognize they have the compass and the square, symbol, of course, of the builders of their profession. And this is actually how they look like. So there's a number of contemporaries as well in the fresco. Anyway, so it's a really, really strong political message. Perugino also, in the Garments of Christ here, he puts his signature by putting some letters, by putting the P. And then in the background, we have this beautiful octagonal baptistry with, again, the triumphal arches. This is a quintessentially Renaissance image, you know, with the perspective, the lines on the floors, people, you know, moving in more episode in the background. There's all this very rich, very complex scene. This is like Renaissance art in the 1400s at its best. This is some of the greatest artists that ever worked in the Renaissance. The last one is then the Last Supper, with Judas sitting on the opposite side, so you can actually tell he was the betrayer. And then on the other side, the passing of Moses. And then the basically the eastern wall, it's the one that basically got damaged. Actually, the wall, back to the wall here, came down, nearly killed the Pope at the beginning of in 1512 as he was entering, and I think killed a Swiss guard or two. And in fact, you see the coat of arms is the coat of arms of the Medici, which was rebuilt later on by the Pope Medici. And then in 1580s, the frescoes were remade by two late Renaissance artists, Rick van der Breck and Matteo da Lecce, with the resurrection of Christ and the fight between angels and demons for the corpse of Moses. And then Michelangelo came to Rome not long after. So the chapel was completed around 1484 or so. Then the Pope died. The Pope after was Pope Borgia, was known to be a very corrupted Pope with 4 children who we tried to make, head of an independent state within the state of the Church. But the Pope after, Pope Julius, was the one, so the nephew of Pope della Rovere, was the one who invited Michelangelo to come to Rome for a great tat. So this, I have a bigger picture of him. It's here. So this is the portrait that Raphael made of Pope Julius. Raphael as well worked for Pope Julius in the rooms of Raphael, so the papal apartments. So during the same time, while Michelangelo was painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Raphael was there next door painting the rooms of Raphael, to do the greatest artist. And then to add to that greatness, in 1513, also Leonardo da Vinci arrived there and spent about 2.5 years in Rome, working for the Pope Medici. When the Pope died, Leo the 10th, he had to basically to leave. Pope Medici, which was actually the son of Lorenzo il Magnifico, so was Medici like the rulers. So Pope Julius was really a big-headed guy. He had this project of rebuilding the Basilica of St. Peter by destroying the old one completely, and then starting new foundation, rebuilding a giant dome on the tomb of Peter. The architect who designed this was Donato Bramante. Bramante was from the same area of Raphael. So he was the one who introduced Raphael to the Pope, saying, oh, he could do some amazing frescoes. And he started doing the apartments. And then the Pope wanted the greatest sculpture of that time to make his tomb right on the top of the tomb of Peter, because he was a successor of Peter, and he was the one who had rebuilt the church from the very foundation. This was, of course, a building, but again, had a very strong political and religious message. He was rebuilding the church from its foundation. Now, in the same years, I don't remember the exact year, but it must have been the beginning of 1505, 1506, 1507, Martin Luther came to Rome, and he saw the prostitutes in St. Peter's Square. He saw people selling scenes and a lot of things that were, selling the forgiveness of the sins and things as such. So he was horrified, and then again, he went back to Germany, and later on led the movement that was one of the biggest events in the history of the church by splitting the church into, and then later on England followed for different reasons, but not too different. Anyway, Pope Julius asked Michelangelo in 1505 to create a giant pyramids, because of course, you know, pyramid is the shape of the tomb. There were many pyramids at the time in Rome. One is still preserved in the southern part of Rome, and the idea was to create something like this. These are artists, they're not by Michelangelo, the drawings, but they are a fair idea of what would it look like. So some 40 statues, these naked guys here supporting the walls, these allegories. You recognize here on the corner Moses, that was actually created by Michelangelo for this tomb, for this project, and then the Pope sitting on the top. Now, only 7 statues out of the 40 were made. Then the Pope ran out of money because he was building the church. At that time, he also started the war in northern Italy against France, because the area of Bologna in northern Italy, where in the Pagnola Padana, where the tortellini are from, it was part of Frank's possession in the 700s AD, so some 700 years before. And then the French king claimed those lands based on that, you know, ancient possession. And of course, the Pope said no way. So there was a war then. And the Pope actually, Pope Julius, they said he was more familiar with the sword. He had more familiarity to hold the sword than to hold a splinker, you know, or the cross for the services. So he was actually a man of war rather than a man of faith. Anyway, he ran out of money. Plus, Bramante didn't really like Michelangelo much. He felt he could be a competitor, and so he suggested to the Pope, it's not really a good idea to want to build your own tomb, you know, because let's you know, it might be a bad luck if you actually decide to do something like that. Just leave it for when, you know, it would be the time. And so Michelangelo was not paid. He left Rome, and after 2 years, he was convinced to come back. And the Pope had changed his idea again and said, okay, I want to do the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The chapel was connected with his family because his uncle was the Pope who actually rebuilt it and made the decoration. So he wanted Michelangelo to paint the disciples on the ceiling. Michelangelo said, no way, I don't think the disciples are a good subject. I come up with something different. And he thought about the creation, which was indeed the genius idea, because the chapel, it's basically quintessentially a frescoed and a built allegory of what the Catholic theology is. It describes the whole project of human salvation that God has laid off for mankind. That's why there is Moses and the Judaism and the commandments, Jesus Christ with the Christianism. Then there are the popes here, so the continuity. And then, of course, everything began with the creation and the prophets and the Sibyls, and again, the ancestors of Jesus Christ, connecting everything. Later on, when the Pope Clement VII, who was the cousin of Pope Leo X, he was Lorenzo's Magnifico nephew. He was the son of his murdered brother, Giuliano. So the Pope Clement VII asked Michelangelo around 1533, to complete the project of the chapel by doing the Last Judgment. So everything then was completed, and the Sistine Chapel, it is definitely the greatest masterpiece that represent this grand project of just theological project. Now, so Michelangelo actually had a lot of troubles in starting. First of all, the roof was not built properly. It leaked. He had a lot of humidity. He had to be built later on, and now there is actually a gap. I'll show you a cross section. Of course, there's a lot more information I can give you, but of course, I'm trying to keep it kind of short. You could see that this is the cross section of this chapel. These are the rooms underground. Now, when you take, or if you're taking a tour of the Vatican, you usually go through a number of rooms. You see the galleries, you see the rooms of Raphael, then you go underground, where is the contemporary art collection. It's a collection of about 300 paintings that were collected in 1960s and 1970s, mostly gifts from different donors, including the King of Spain and a few other people. And you walk through some rooms couple of them really big with the Matisse artworks, you are actually underneath the chapel. And then they make you go all around and then come in from the side again. And then you could see that the chapel is about 14 meters wide, which is about 40 feet, roughly 40 feet wide. And then it's 20 feet tall, 20 meters tall, which is about 60 feet tall, from the floor till the roof here is much higher on the outside. And then it's about 40 meters long from one end to from east to west. So basically from the altar to the door. And these are supposed to be the precise proportion of the Temple of Solomon, the temple in Jerusalem, which of course was studied during the Crusades by the Templars. And there was a connection between, of course, that temple and the temple of and the Sistine Chapel, because there was this kind of line, you know, the revelation, Moses through of course the Hebrew, and then from Hebraism, from Judaism into Catholicism. So there's all this line, this kind of pact between man and God. You see, there are some rooms above it, because then the roof had to be originally was like was here down here, but then he leaked. He had a number of problems, and so he had to be rebuilt on a higher level. This was done later on after Michelangelo intervention. And some barracks for the Swiss guards were actually created up here in the underneath the roof, in the gap between the ceiling of the chapel. So we say some overbuilding that they did. Anyway, then Michelangelo started actually on the entrance wall. He had a bit of trouble creating the scaffolding, because Donato Bramante built a scaffolding for him. Now, this is actually for the scaffolding that was built for the last judgment, but imaging was made of wood, like kind of flimsy, and the first one had ropes anchored on the vault that of course had a lot of holes in the vault. So Michelangelo was really angry with Bramante, saying, "You're an idiot. How am I supposed to paint and leave all those holes and those gaps? This is not going to work." So he complained with the Pope. The Pope gave him more money, and then he was able to build the scaffolding how he wanted. He basically used some pre-existing holes that are called buche pontaie, basically holes that the builders leave in order to put beams to build scaffolding using the walls. And then he created basically the scaffolding that he wanted. So this is part of the scaffolding of Michelangelo on the roof. Of course, he had to paint standing, looking up, or even on his back on the side, to basically be able to fit in the gap on the edge. Now, this drawings, I couldn't find really something done well, and not the good at drawing, but probably the scaffolding was kind of curved. Now, if you look at this, is the picture where they restored the ceiling. It's pretty much similar. You can see there's a guy down here on a lower level, because of course the vault goes down here. So it's basically on the corners. It's a very narrow space, and it was quite humid. So the first colors that was given. This actually, you could see while they were storing the temptation of Adam and Eve. It was actually there was some mildew, some moss kind of growing on it. It turned green, and so they had to do it over again. Michelangelo had a lot of troubles in the beginning, so he began from this side here. This one here, where's the door, and in fact the figures are much smaller, while the figures on the other side are much bigger, because the scaffolding only covered half of the chapel. And then he took about 2 years and a half to make the first half, and then they took down the scaffolding. He saw that the figures were looking a bit too small from that distance, so he decided to make them a little bigger. So on this side a bit bigger. Now, with this application, we could do something that is not possible now, but was quite common during the Renaissance and up to 18th and 19th century. Visitors during the Grand Tour age, they could actually ask to go and walk between the windows. There's a little passageway now where they have the lights and the air conditioning, and so you can actually see the frescoes for very close distance. And we are, you know, just on the windowsill, and you could see all the graffiti left by the travelers, 1819, mostly 1800s. And it's quite amazing that, you know, people just left their names, 1827. So these were visitors which were accompanied there, and then they left like a token of their visit. Now, if you do that today in Italy, you go to jail, of course, and it's rightful so. But in many monuments of Rome, they had, from the 1400s onwards, names and dates. Even Michelangelo, Pinturicchio, and other painters, they enter some Roman ruins, the Domus Aurea, which was the house of Nero, just opposite the Colosseum. And on the fresco, they made a graffiti with their name, saying, "Oh, I've been here." Now, so you see, graffiti, everybody complains that when visitors come from abroad to Italy, they say, "Oh, why Rome and Italian cities, they have so many graffiti everywhere?" Well, that's what we've been doing for hundreds of years. So of course we keep the tradition alive. So I'm just kidding. You can see here the creation. So of course, God separating dark and light. And then I have some more. This is nice, this up, but you can't really see the details. So I'm using some high-res pictures then. And then the creation, the separation, the creation of the planets, the creation of the animals, and then of course the creation of Adam, which is really, really beautiful. Let me just close a couple of pictures. Now here, yeah, this is, for example, God in his pajamas. So apparently Michelangelo was kind of raving about this thing of representing God's bottom. You could see here God in the back. So his idea was to give God's kind of a reality, a person, what you can connect. And this has a lot to do with this personal religious experience. Now, we know that Michelangelo was in touch with the group of people called the Spirituale, which means spirituals. Their beliefs were quite similar to some Christian churches like the Pentecostals or other churches that believe in direct inspiration and contact between God and man. This was based on the teaching of a Renaissance Spanish theologian, Juan de Valdés, which became very popular in Renaissance Italy. The church at that time was really, really corrupted. It was more about business and politics, very little about spiritual life. And so these people seek, like, you know, authentic spiritual enlightenment. Michelangelo was one of them. He was a devoted believer. And so this idea of creating God, a more like father-like figure that you can actually relate to, even, you know, having a body, rounded body, it gives you like someone you can talk to, like a father, like a real person. And so he deeply believed in this direct relationship between man and God. And then there's these figures, which of course as a celebration of the human body, the masterpiece of human creation. Now Michelangelo, when he was 17 or 18, was allowed, thanks to Lorenzo de' Medici, to study anatomy in the Hospital of Santo Spirito in Florence. For the Church of the Hospital, he made a beautiful crucifix made of wood, which was recently, you know, restored and now has been confirmed as is Michelangelo's. Where Ionedi knew the anatomy very well, because at that time it was not illegal, but it was really difficult to be able to get bodies to study anatomy. It was frowned upon. No one will give you their relative's body. You have to find, like, you know, prisoners or murderers or other people who've been killed, you know, or to do anatomy. So it wasn't really easy to get a corpse because it was considered a desecration. Now, after that, we have, let me get back to the pictures. Of course, the creation of Adam, which is really a central and magnificent piece where we have basically God surrounded by a number of angels, including male and female. So this idea that God is completely represent everything, mother, father, all the principles. And then instead of having in the Genesis, in the Bible, it says that God basically with the model a clay statue and that breath through the nostrils of this clay statue, which of course it wouldn't look great on a fresco anyway, that kind of scene. But he put the fingers for a very specific reason. The reason is that Michelangelo, as a creator, believed that what the greatest gift that God gave to us is the power of creation of beauty. Now we are we are basically capable of creating art not because we need it, not for a practical reason, but just because we enjoy it. Now, Michelangelo grew up in Lorenzo il Magnifico, Lorenzo de' Medici's house, and Lorenzo hosted philosophers, Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, some of the greatest geniuses, some of the early scholars of Platonic philosophy. In the 1400s, the Platonic Academy, where they studied Plato philosophy, was established in Florence, and you know, was around for a few centuries. Now, this gave this vision of the fact that the God was like didn't create the world and us because he needed us. He created the world for his own enjoyment. So he enjoyed himself in creating the universe. So as a reflection of that, we create art and beauty because we enjoy ourselves in it. We don't really need that for anything practical. And this spark is what makes us divine, like basically like a creation, an image of God. In this fingers getting close but not touching, there's about an inch, about 2 centimeters, a gap between the two. There is as well the gap between man and of course and God, which is, you know, quite a big difference. Now we have as well the let me just get it, the about 20 or 30 years ago, a physician, by looking at the fresco, which I have here again. This is a better picture. You can see basically the details here. You have, and it's a beauty. The composition is magnificent because it's so simple. You see, there's no background, just, you know, a random kind of green rock, and then Adam so beautifully on the side, and then God just flying with this. So in such an effortless way, the position is look like a dancer. It's magnificent. Every details. What is magnificent of that is such a vast fresco, and it took him so long, but the level of details, it's amazing. Every single part is well thought, and it's beautiful, and it's on the quality that it's incredible. Now, as I said, this physician, by looking at the profile, showed that basically the side of the cross section of this will be exactly the silhouette. It matches exactly the cross section of a human brain. Which is something that basically a physician could see very easily. Of course, not a common person. I think not even today. And even the details, they match a little bit. Now, it is possible that Michelangelo wanted to give a message, and the message would have been that what really is the center of our understanding of God is our brain, science, philosophy. That this is what gets us to God, close to God, not just the feelings or the emotion, which is something that was a big part in the Catholic theology. So there's also another message here. Anyway, not many people could actually recognize it. They can't today. I imagine in the Renaissance it was almost impossible. So it's a nice thought, but you know, it might not be really a main thing there. Now, and then it follows with the Adam and Eve, which are basically the creation of Eve, of course, after that, and then Adam and Eve sent out from the Garden of Eden. Let's go a little bit further so we can see it better. Yes, and we turn it around. Sorry, I have to do all this, but here we are. And so you can see the tree, which actually is a fig tree, because then the leaves were used to cover the nudities. Adam and Eve, very close to themselves, actually. Eve's head is very close to Adam's waist, which is kind of odd, but for Michelangelo worked out, and also for the church at the time. And then the snake that ends up with the shape of a woman, because of course in the Middle Ages and still in the early Renaissance theology, every trouble and sin come from women, and I'm sure most married men could relate to that. I'm just kidding. So I hope my wife doesn't hear me. I'm teasing, of course. And then here we have the angel sending out Adam and Eve suddenly turn ugly and suffering, and this is pretty much to the literally what it says basically in the Bible. You could see here Adam and Eve painted in a great chapel that Michelangelo knew very well. This is the Brancachi Chapel in Florence, a great masterpiece of the early Renaissance. Was painted by Masaccio and Masolino da Panicale in the beginning of 1400s, in the early years of 1400s, and Florence and Michelangelo also knew it really, really well. So he actually got this very dramatic scene, you know, with the angel dressed with red, because of course his anger, and then the faces and the nudity and all that. This is how in the Renaissance they brought back, you know, life and emotions to art. And then the last one are episodes of the flood and Moses, Noah's Ark down here. Let me just get a little bit down there so you can see a little bit better, and we can get it up here. All right, so there it is. So there are basically three: the drunkard was on Noah, and then the flood. See, the figures are very little. This piece is missing. It fell after actually a terror attack in the 19th century during the wars for the unification of Italy. There was a bombing at the nearby Sant'Angelo Castle, which was the place where they stock ammunition. And of course, the boom was, you know, really bad, and part of the fresco fell down, and the Pope had it replastered but left it blank, like you know, to remind the brutality of terror, the brutality of what at that time the terrorists were actually, they wanted democracy and unification of Italy. So they actually they eventually won, but of course bombing a place was not a great choice. It wasn't then, it's not now, and hopefully it won't be again in the future. Anyway, and here there's Thanksgiving of Noah. On the side, then we have these giant figures of prophetess, pagan prophetesses, 5 of them, and 7 Jewish prophets, and then these families, which are a beautiful detail. There's 40 of them that represents all the ancestors of Jesus Christ. So it's the link between David, the King of Jews, and King David and Jesus Christ, to show that, of course, Jesus was a descendant of the King of Israel. Now, there is a beautiful cosmos floor, the floor of the Roman marble masters, and of course, this is the Cantoria, the place where the singers and the choir sings. The Sistine Chapel is also a choir of they call it white voices. They're young children that sing for the chapel. Now, the ceiling was completed by 1512. On the corners, there are more episodes: the Esther and Asuero. Then we have the Moses and the gilded snake, when Moses ordered to cast a gold snake, and then on the end, to prevent people from being killed by snakes that were sent as a punishment for their sins. And then we have David and Goliath on the right, a subject with which Michelangelo was very familiar. And then on the left, Judith and Holofernes. So they're all episodes in which God intervened to save the Jews. If you respect the pact and the law, God will protect you. Again, this is the message. Then we have on the main altar, of course, the masterpiece, one of the greatest masterpieces of Western art and art of all, the Last Judgment. Now, the Last Judgment was made some 20 years later. Michelangelo came back to Rome in the early 1530s after having worked for over 10 years for the Medici. Then there was a revolution in Florence between 1527 and 1530. The Medici were exiled. Michelangelo fought against the Medici for the Republic. It was a bit mess. There was a time for a few weeks he even had to live underground to save himself in Florence. And then the Pope, at that time, again, his name was Giulio di Giuliano de' Medici, was Lorenzo Magnifico's nephew, and he became Pope with the name of Clement VII. He wanted Michelangelo to cover the old frescoes and represent this magnificent scene of the Last Judgment. I'm just going a few minutes over time. I hope you don't mind. We have in the center the creation, Jesus Christ of the resurrection. I'll be using a picture here as well because we might need a bigger picture. And now in total, there are over 300 figures. And it took Michelangelo nearly 7 years. The Pope died before Michelangelo could start. The successor was Pope Paul III, Alexander Farnese. He is the Pope who started the Catholic Reformation, the council in Trento, in northern Italy. That was a complete reformation of the Catholic Church. So it was really an important time for the Church. In 1534-35, Michelangelo finally started the fresco, and it took a few years. Now, the first bit he did painting with oil. Painting. Now, traditionally, painters would have used egg yolk tempera, egg white tempera, egg base tempera, which had a small number of colors you can achieve, and especially on the fresco. The fresco basically is a technique where you paint on the wet wall, so the color goes deep, maybe that's half a centimeter or so, so maybe a quarter of an inch down into the wall. And so you can see you have the brick wall, then you have a thicker plaster, and then you have a thinner one, and then you have the last part of a plaster where you can paint. Now that has to be wet in order for the color to go in deep. So even if you scratch the surface, it'll stay. It doesn't matter. It's not affected. The color doesn't change, and that's how it can last so long, because it's not superficial. And at that time, oil painting became popular. It was imported from Northern Europe. And a close friend of Michelangelo called Sebastiano del Piombo, he was a Venetian painter and was the official painter of the Pope at that time, suggested to the Pope to ask Michelangelo to make oil painting. Michelangelo has never used it, and he failed. And so he was really upset. So he broke his friendship with his friend nearly after 20 years. And so what happened, it was like he never talked to him ever again. So Michelangelo is definitely a man you don't want to mess with. So after more 20 years of friendship, he stopped talking to this guy forever. Now, it took another year to basically prepare the wall. The wall is not perfectly vertical. The top part comes forward a little bit. So there's a little inclination of the wall to prevent the distortion when you're looking from the floor of the figures. Now, the center of the scene is, of course, Jesus Christ. But this is not the skinny Jesus that you usually see. Now, there are a couple of things that you could see that really stand out. They're different to every other representation that we had of Jesus ever. Now, if you want to, I don't know if you want to try to answer the question. So you can unmute yourself anytime if you want. So what is the thing in the face of Jesus and the body of Jesus that really, there are two things that are really different than the usual Jesus that we always see in every fresco image or painting or thing. And you should know it even if you don't go to church, because, you know, it's mostly everywhere. Anyone wants to take on? Do you want to unmute? What is it that do you think really stands out in this image of Christ? Any volunteer? Anyone? No one? So basically is beardless. You see, there's no beard. Now, usually Jesus Christ had a long beard, you know, as he probably would have had, because Jesus at that time would have had a beard. But there's not. And also, it's not the skinny Jesus we usually see. It's really muscly. He's big. It looks more like a pagan god, like Zeus or, you know, another of those statues of gods. Michelangelo clearly was inspired by the statues in the Vatican Museum collection. Now, the museums, the collection already exists since the 1400s. There were statues. This statue was already there. It's the Apollo de Belvedere. It's in the Vatican museums. And the expression, the hairstyle is pretty much the same as the, let me see, where is it? Let me just close a couple of pictures. So if I take it here, you could see that it's pretty much the hairstyle, the face, the expression is pretty much the same. So this statue was basically his model. And also there's a big muscly body, because this is not the day of forgiveness. This is the day of judgment. That's the terror that, you know, we should have of Christ. Even the disciples here, Peter and Paul on the right, they're scared and afraid, say, this is the end of it. Peter is giving back the keys of the kingdom of heaven, so the keys that we saw in the fresco before, because that, of course, would be the end. And on the left, there's the Virgin Mary, and down here, some of the martyrs. This is San Bartolome with the knife, but San Bartolome is holding a skin, which is the self-portrait of Michelangelo. So Michelangelo managed to put himself as a flayed man, as a flayed skin, in here. Why would he do that? There is a I have a better portrait somewhere, but I might be using that one. This is by, this is actually a portrait made by one of his pupils that is really infamous for what he did, and I'm telling you in a minute. So basically the beard, the nose that was broken. When he was a teenager, while he was studying art with another artist called Torrigiani, which is a little older than him, they entered into a fight. Torrigiani broke his nose with the first in the face. Lorenzo Magnifico exiled Torrigiani. So this artist first went to Northern Europe, then to London, and then after he went to Spain. He's the one who brought the Italian Renaissance in Spain, basically. Torrigiani, but you know, for giving a first to the poor Michelangelo. Anyway, because Michelangelo was quite bitter when he since a young age. Anyway, there are thousands of pages being written on this. Some believe that this man here, it's actually the portrait of this guy here, which I have somewhere, whose name is Pietro Aretino. Aretino was a poet at the time, was the official poet of the church, and also he wrote some kind of pornographic poems, and he got into trouble, so eventually he had to leave the church. But he really said that Michelangelo used too many nudity in the chapel, all those naked bodies that were not right in the chapel of the Pope. It was something ridicule. It was like kind of pornography, and he knew well because he was quite you know, versated in that kind of art. Let me see. Yeah, so there's a question. I'll read it at the end. Thank you. But yeah, it's true what you just wrote. Sorry, no, it's not this one. Let me get here. Yes. So personally, so they got, you know, the message could have been, oh, this guy would have won me, you know, taking my skin out of me. But I think that Michelangelo, as we saw, he, as a creator, as an artist, a creator of beauty, he saw himself pure and in direct contact with God, inspired through art. Art is a beautiful way to connect with the God, and whatever God you believe. Every art in every time of history or space in the world has always been art, the main way people have, humankind is connected with art, and depend, you know, regardless of the religion. And so basically in this, Michelangelo wanted to say that he will be judged, but only his skin will be judged, because he sinned with his skill. His soul already belongs to God because he's the soul of an artist. And I really like this kind of a romantic interpretation. Now, the judgment scene starts from the bottom here. We have the resurrection of the flesh, you know, the corpses resurrecting, and you could see some skeleton turning into flesh again, and there are these demons here. I'll talk about the demons again, and then also there are a number of characters down here, including, for example, this priest here, for somebody could be Savonarola, which was this priest, and between 1494 and 98 led the revolution in Florence against the Medici. The Medici were kicked out. Lorenzo died in 92, so it was his son that was kicked out, Piero, and started kind of a theocratic kind of dictatorship that didn't last long. Eventually was burned alive. So there might be a number of contemporaries, Dante Alighieri and so on. There's also, you could see, two African men brought up. So of course, at that time is the time of exploration, so the world became suddenly broader. So Michelangelo wanted to include, of course, every race in his image, which is quite, that's something that I quite think. This is the soul being taken up, waiting for the resurrection. You can see these giant figures here, this woman that has this kind of man arm here with this breast just glued there on the boy on the arm. This is quite typical. Michelangelo creates these big and chunky figures, muscular figures that are not very they're not very elegant, but they have some beauty. They have some amazing dramatic impact. And then we have up here the symbols of the Passion of Christ, the cross, the crown of thorns, and the column to which Christ was tied to be whipped. And then down here we have the people going to heaven, just kissing each other, celebrating. There are a number of other, figures that probably, there are over 100 figures that have been recognized as contemporaries. out of 300 figures in total, so it's pretty a lot. Here more saints, Saint Catherine, Saint Biagius, Saint Sebastian with the arrows. They are all the tools through which they were killed in life. And then we have in the center the 7 trumpets of the apocalypse, and then 2 books, a big book and a small book. One has the list of the people going to heavens, and the other one with the people of the list of the people going to hell. Which one is which? The big book or the last book for people going to hell? I just have a sip of my Chianti wine because I'm getting a bit thirsty. So which one do you think it is? So the big book is people going to hell. So Michelangelo didn't have a very positive view towards mankind, but this is a similar view that Martin Luther had. By then, Lutheranism already happened about 20 years before the time this fresco was made. So basically, the idea of Martin Luther widely circulated also in the Catholic world. That's why the Pope decided to do the Catholic Reformation, just to say what it was right and what it was wrong. And they did that in a very dogmatic way, saying this is what we believe, that's it, no question asked. And this was the way that the Catholic Church had for a long time. Now the Catholic Church today is very different from what it was in the 1500s. The beliefs are very, very different. I would say that in the preaching or in the theology, very similar to other Christian churches, especially the Anglican Church, the Baptist Church. The theology is really similar. In fact, there's a lot of continuity with all the other churches. Now, at the bottom, of course, hell. And here Michelangelo again shows how a great genius he is, because I have some other pictures here as a detail of them because they're very beautiful. First of all, when he was 14, the very first painting known by Michelangelo is this Temptation of St. Anthony, painted in the so Michelangelo was born in 75. This was painted between 87 and 90. He was some 12, 13, 14 years old. This is the very first painting known by Michelangelo. You can see these demons here. So the legend says that, or the tradition was basically most of the information about the life of Michelangelo are through his biography that was written while he was alive with this consensus by a man called Ascanio Condivi. And then there's the biography written, there's a couple more, and then there's the one written by Giorgio Vasari, who was a painter and a friend of Michelangelo in the late 1500s. And he is the one who tells this story. Apparently, Michelangelo went to the fish market and studied the scales and the fish, all the fish biological features to create, the tentacles, to create these demons that symbolize the temptation of St. Anthony, which is basically based on an etching by a German artist. You could see the scales, basically the spikes and all that kind of thing. So this tells a lot how Michelangelo was a great observer of nature in order to represent it. Now, this actually, this painting was offered to the Metropolitan Museum in New York, which didn't have the money to buy it. And so it was sold, guess to who? Try to guess. You can unmute yourself. To Texas, of course. So it's in a museum in Texas because, of course, they raised a lot of money. Where is it? I don't remember the place. I think Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth. So it's basically, they found a few millions to buy this piece. It wasn't that expensive. I don't remember how much, maybe 10 or 12 million, something like that. Of course, now this is probably worth 20, 30 times over. Now, let's go back to the demons, the details of the devils, because Michelangelo is such a great genius. He doesn't show us hell, but this is the resurrection. Yes, he shows us the boat with Charon, the demon, which he took inspiration from. Is a pagan figure. It doesn't appear in any official theology, but in the 1200s, actually in the beginning of the 1300s, Dante Alighieri, Italian's greatest poet, one of the greatest European poets, who wrote at the beginning of 1300s this Divine Comedy, kind of a journey through heaven and hell. from hell to heaven, in which he describes a lot of contemporaries and creates a lot of vision. Michelangelo knew it by heart, so he used a lot of figures by Dante Alighieri. It was really, really common. Everybody knew him and commenting it. So there's this devil at the gate of hell, and then you can see we don't actually see hell, but only the fact that we perceive it. We know what it is there. We could see the devils with all those kind of animal figures, the legs, you see the wings and all this kind of horrific features. That is enough to scare us. Actually, it's more scarier just the thought of it actually seeing represented, because then you might see, oh, that's it. So it's something that we don't know. It's actually more horrific than something that we can actually see and know. And the guy here at the door is actually a portrait of a contemporary of Michelangelo. Michelangelo entered into a fight a few months before the fresco was over. It was the master of ceremony of Pope Paul III. His name is Biagio da Cesena, and basically he criticized the nudity of the fresco. And Michelangelo, of course, insulted him, and that was the end of it. So it wasn't a great thing. But a few years after the fresco was completed, Michelangelo was asked to repaint and put all the cloth to the nudes, which of course he refused to do. The last group of figures here are the 7 deadly sins. You can recognize Grid here, this guy pulled down by a bag of coins and some keys, and then this guy with the first in his bottom, and then another one with the first in his mouth, to represent respectively lust and gluttony, and then a few others then. So Michelangelo said, no way, I'm not doing it, because I'm nearly 90, so I'm not going to up a scaffolding. And also to cover the nudities, which, you know, some of them, they were actually completely naked. It only takes a bit of pain. That is not an issue for the church. The church has bigger issues to fix, because of course, that's what we said. Of course, the church didn't care. They asked one of his most talented pupils, Daniele da Volterra, which is the artist who made the portrait of Michelangelo that I showed you before, that also show the friendship with the master. This is a copy made at the beginning of 1500, so probably you know, soon after the fresco was completed, and it's kept in a museum in Naples, Museo di Capodimonte. And you can see that most of these figures didn't have any undies. They were all naked, because of course, when we resurrect with our body and flesh, but no garments, no clothes. So like before the original sin, there would be no thing. So even, you know, the sinners here. So there were about, the first round, about 20 cloths were put to cover. And since then, the Daniele da Volterra, which is a great artist, his paintings are in the Louvre. There are some amazing chapels that he painted in Rome and in Tuscany, but he is only known for putting the trousers to Michelangelo's frescoes. So he's known as the braghettone, the trouser maker in Italian. So the one lesson here is to be learned. Doesn't matter what you do, but if you mess with somebody else's artwork, they will remember you for that. So don't mess with other people's work. Just do your own and do it right. And this is like a detail where you could see St. Catherine. She was completely naked and with some Biagios in the back. They looking like they're having sex. So that was something that really was completely covered and repainted over completely. So that's why during the last restoration, there were about 2 or 3 rounds. In total, there are over 40 of these cloths that have been added. And so only maybe half of them have been removed, because the others, they said they couldn't remove them. And I think still today we have a problem with nudity, which is amazing to think that in the 1500s it was okay, but then now it's become a problem again. And, you know, even of course, in an art context, because of course this was not related to sexuality at all. Now, I think I've given you, thank you for your time. I've been a little bit over time. Just add a couple more information. Of course, you know, this is used as the chapel for the conclave, for the election of the Pope. And they set up the chimney, which I got a picture here, which is temporary. They only put it when it needed, to make the smoke coming out of the Sistine Chapel when the Pope is elected. This is a picture with Pope Francesco, the current Pope, who was elected by the cardinals, which are just over 100, I think 115, 120 or so. And they come from all over the world. In fact, Pope Francesco is the first pope that comes from a New World, from Argentina, and you know, for a long time the popes were the early popes of Christianity in the early centuries. They were actually most North Africans, because the church was all in North Africa and Middle East. In the Middle Ages, were mostly Europeans. In the Renaissance, almost exclusively Italians, till John Paul II in 1978. And then in the last years, you know, they've all been foreigners, because the church is more international, and of course he has a complete different take on this presence in the world. Now, let me see. Every time there's an election, a conclave, there's all this kind of thing that they bet on what will be the next pope, or which country will be coming from this part of the world, that part of the world. So it's always kind of, but I think this in the church is very strong in Central and South America and in Southeastern Asia, some areas. So the next pope is most likely to come from that part. Northern Europe, North America, that church had a lot of troubles there. So I don't think any of those cardinals are not soon, not yet. And in the Italians as well, they had a lot of problems. There's been a couple of cardinals involved in financial scandals. So I don't think there's an Italian cardinal next. It would be a Mexican or Southern American again, or maybe Filipino. I don't know. It would be some other parts of the world. Maybe African, but African is very different. African church it's had a lot of issues with Rome, so they're quite independent, the Catholic in the community in Africa from Rome. Okay, so this is how, you know, when they all set up with the cardinals, with the chimney and with the smoke in the square. This is also the dimension of the Sistine Chapel. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the tour. If you have, I asked you to unmute if you want to make if you want to make a comment, if there's any question. So you know, I'll be doing more tours. I'll do a tour every Sunday, and then I'll do more free tours in the coming weeks. So on the website that you received the link on the email, so you can book there every week. There's 2 tours. It's the same one repeated. This Sunday, I'm doing a tour about the secret of the Vatican. We'll explore parts of the Vatican not generally open to the public, or, you know, the Vatican archives. I'll be talking about all those little secrets about the Vatican that everybody really wants to know. Of course, some great art, which usually it's very difficult to see, or even I've seen most of this art was only once or twice, and I've been to the Vatican thousands of times. And then of course we'll talk about the Colosseum, Caravaggio, and so on. So you can email me if you want more grazie mille, thank you very much, thank you.
Thank you.
So you will receive also an email when I ask a feedback, and if you really enjoyed it, there's also the opportunity to leave some tips if you feel you like it, or of course you don't have to. I really like to be doing these tours. I started in March, when of course the business came to a standstill. Like, we went from being a really thriving travel company to basically zero, and it looks like this for the next at least for the next 6 months, because I don't think we'll be traveling again internationally, not till March. Most of my clients are from North America and Southeastern Asia. So of course it's not happening anytime soon. So I really like to do this. Next free tour will be about the Pantheon. And it will basically, I'll tell you also, that is completely free, like this one. And you can also book online on the website. It will be November 15 in the afternoon. It will be a little earlier than this one. It'll be at 3 p.m. And then every month it will be a free one. So it'll be a different one. And as well, this one of Sistine Chapel will be replicated. If you missed the beginning or if you missed the end, I will send you the link to the recording of this one. And also on the YouTube channel, you will find a few other videos of free tours that I've been making in the last month. So thank you very much. I don't know if you have any question. The thing I love about this is people from every part of the world, from Australia, which I don't know what time is it, but it must be very early in the morning, with people from Turkey, from Russia, from Canada, from the United States, from England, a lot of people, from Europe, continental Europe, Greece, everywhere.
What is your YouTube channel, Mario?
Yeah, it's I put the link on it. The link is on the email.
Okay.
I'll give you the I'll put the link in the chat here. Let me see, but you will receive that in the email as well. In the email, if let me just put it here. Okay. Let me see if the link should, it's so on the channel you could see some of the tours. The tours that so the tours that I do weekly, they require there's a ticket of 12 euros. It's about $13-14 or about 10-11 pounds, and about similar to this. Those ones are not available on the YouTube channel, of course, but the others one, the free ones, and some other parts of it, they are. Isn't the torso of Jesus based on ancient Greek statue in the valley? Yes, that's what I was saying before. It's based on the Belvedere. It's a question by Cliff Norris. So yes, it's based on the Belvedere, on the Apollo del Belvedere. The muscular parts, the torso and that part, Michelangelo studied intensively, mostly two statues, the Belvedere torso and the Lagoon, or Lagoon, as you say in English. I'll just show you the picture now so you could see it. It's this one here. You could see this statue was discovered nearby the Colosseum around 1504, 1505. It was the time when Michelangelo was in Rome. He actually went there with Sangallo, which was a friend of him and was an architect from Florence. Later on, he became the architect of the Basilica of St. Peter. And they found it being unearthed nearby the Colosseum in a street called Via dei Serpenti, Snake Street, because they found the statue with and he represented the high priest of the city of Troy, trying to stop the Trojan horse to be taken inside the city of Troy, and of course being the end, the doom of the city. And you could see there that the muscle, the attention for the anatomical details, the drama, the dramatic expression, and all that. This is all based with the rediscovering of anatomy, the discovering of Roman and Greek art and culture. This was a statue made by artists from the island of Rhodes in the Greek Sea, and made probably in the 3rd or 4th century BC. And then this actual piece is probably a Roman copy of the 1st century. It's debated, they're not sure whether this is a copy of the original one, but most likely to be a Roman copy. The Romans were like copycats. They copied thousands of Greek statues, and we know mostly Greek art through the Roman copies. So I guess one day we'll know mostly Renaissance and Italian art through, the copies that we buy from the souvenir shops or the guidebooks or the postcards and stuff like that. And the originals will eventually be gone. Okay, so thank you again. I don't know if you have any other questions or if you have suggestions, anything you'd like to say. I hope everybody got their time, because doing this virtual tours internationally is always an issue with the time and with the time zones, because the time changes, and in the booking thing you can ask the time zone, but you cannot change the time according to the time zone, because our booking system was made for local tours. So the tours are all based in Italy and in Europe. So that's the continental Europe time zone. So the Eastern one. Okay. If you don't have any other questions, I went to Rome. Yeah, the colors are amazing. Yeah, that's really amazing. Okay, so thank you very much for joining. Stay tuned. I'll send you a request of a feedback via email, and then if you want to receive our emails, just let me know. Otherwise, it was good to see you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Good evening. Good afternoon. Good night.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.